Welcome to In the Demo, a show about the stories that get told about groups, how those stories got made, what we think those stories get wrong, and why it matters. You hosts? Farrah Bostic is the founder and head of research and strategy of The Difference Engine, a strategic insights consultancy focused on helping business leaders make decisions. Adam Piano, author and brand consultant and managing director of brand strategy at Arizona State University. You are now in the demo.
Okay, so what the hell is going on in strategy, Twitter, strategy, LinkedIn? Like, people are picking fights with no one who wants to fight them. Like, that is what I am observing.
Can I even ask you a bigger picture question?
Yes.
Why would you want to be in a strategy fight about, is this an insight? Like, why is that a thing? Why are we fighting over methodologies and outputs?
So I somewhat infamously wrote a piece once called "There's No Such Thing as Insights," and that is partly because I'm a pedant and insights is grammatically incorrect.
I think it has become grammatically accepted though by our subgroup.
It has. And I have, from time to time, when I'm talking to someone that I don't think is smart enough for me to argue about it, I just go ahead and fine, insights, like whatever. You know what I mean.
You're a scary person to debate with, Farrah. I have to admit. You bring the thunder.
I was state champion at debate. And I went to nationals at debate. And so, you're goddamn right. Yeah. But the thing about it is, I think that there are a lot of things that brands are able to build campaigns on that are not especially insightful. They just observed that people do a thing and then they put it in the ad. Like, it's fine. Russell Davies used to talk, I think he still does talk about noticing a lot. And I think noticing is a big job for strategists of any industry, like noticing that your customers are behaving a certain kind of way, noticing that culture has taken a turn, noticing that this is the new style out there on the street. Like, that is 9/10 of the job in many respects. Noticing that the sales went up or down, noticing that distribution is up or down. All of that is the big part of the job. Having some kind of insight into it is the thing that I think most strategists, sorry folks, you don't have it. Like, you're too lazy to do it. You're not interested enough in the stuff you work on to develop it. And the point I made in that piece was insight is something you develop. It is a deeper level of understanding. It is a quality you come to possess. You do not have it about everything. And it takes work to get there. It is not a thing you find. Like, the idea of we found some insights in the research is not what research does, and it's not what you do when you read a research report. You don't find some insights in it. You read some data, you see some findings, but the insight is a process. And so that is the only fight I'm interested in having. Apart from and again, sorry, Conrad, I'm just going to keep flogging this horse, but at South by many, many years ago, poor Conrad Lisko is up there back in his RGA days saying we had this insight that people like to listen to music while they exercise. And I laughed. I laughed in the hall because that's not an insight, my man. That was true. Yeah. The very first Sony Walkman ads are of a woman in a leotard and leg warmers. We knew that that's what it was for. It was always for that. People, gyms play music. Jazzercise has to do with the jazz. And it wasn't really jazz, friends. It was pop music. But this is what drives me crazy is I think a lot of strategists want to elevate what they do to something that is either way more important than it actually is, or something ineffable. And I personally dislike, like Crowley and Good Omens, I dislike the ineffable. And so that is the fight I'm willing to have. But I'm not willing to have a fight over whether Mark Ritson or Byron Sharp are right. They're both right. It depends on the situation.
there's so much it depends in all this stuff that we do. Being on the strategy side now for 10 years, fully, I think when I started, it was, I want to do that. I want to make it sound smart. I want people to know I know what the hell I'm talking about. I want to explain, over-engineer 97 slides to get to one point that I'm going to call an insight. I don't care if it's an insight or not, but I need in that case the client, now my own brand, to know this is the thing that we're going to base your communications on. Call it whatever you want. Who cares?
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's the part, I think the two sides of it's not two different sides. There's two different fights going on. There's still the fight from people about doing that, of elevating strategy and making strategy sound worthy of the cost and the investment. But then there's the other side that's like, I think the piece we're going to talk about today, where it's like, hey, you guys are over-engineering this, you're overthinking it, you're creating bubbles, you are insulating strategy in the advertising and communications communities from the real world, which is also bullshit to a point. Like, I mean, I don't know how you want to jump into this piece we're going to talk about, but I can't fight both those fronts. They're both somewhat true, and I don't think either one is worth arguing about, really. But I feel like we have to take it on as part of our work because it directly kind of bumps into some of the research we've spent the last year doing.
Yes. If you are a listener to this podcast and do not work in advertising and branding, I apologize for what you're about to endure.
We might need to make like an explainer episode where we just quickly lay out for people. This is how strategy works.
Well, good luck with that. I think one of, just like the bit of background here is obviously, I think one of the reasons that that we get along is we're strategists who used to be creatives. And so we've been responsible for coming up with the idea that actually becomes the ad, and we've been responsible for coming up with the strategy that should fuel the idea that becomes the ad.
And we've both been responsible for conducting the research that leads to the strategy that becomes the idea, right, that becomes the ad. So I think we've both kind of seen the whole assembly line. Exactly.
And, the thing about the way advertising agencies traditionally for a long time have worked is that the client comes to the agency saying, we want to sell more Lucky Strike, if you're a Mad Men fan. And, but hey, we've got all these constraints. The government is telling us what we can and can't say. And, we've maxed out this particular audience or whatever. And so what are you going to do for us? And the agency goes off and has a think about it. And the process of going off and having a think about it is known as strategy. And some of the time, if you're a resourced agency that has the time and has the skills and has the strategy team, used to be called planning, some places still is called planning, they might go and either commission some original research, or they might go look at some syndicated research. They might go do some man on the street interviews or in-store intercepts, talk to people while they're about to buy a pack of cigarettes and ask them why they're buying the pack that they're buying.
Yeah.
You see scenes like this in Mad Men where like brooding Don Draper is at the bar and asks the waiter what kind of cigarettes he likes and why he likes them. And, that kind of talk to the cab driver approach also is kind of part of just like you're trying to gather a kind of sense of the gestalt, like what is going on out there amongst the types of consumers we're trying to attract. And then you try to turn that into something that can inspire creative people to do creative stuff, right? Like, who are you talking to about what, why, what do we want them to do? And what do you have to do because the client says we have to? And like, that's the basics of a creative brief.
Yeah. And you get in that model, that's a strategist conducting that conversation and turning that into the components of the creative brief that goes to the creative team.
Exactly right.
Part of the debate is the creatives I know that I consider the most insightful, I hate to use that word, or just the most naturally good at creative. I think the debate is, does strategy have to come from strategists? And no, Don Draper was not a strategist, although he applied strategic thinking on that show. There's a lot of creatives who take a brief and then they go, oh, I'm going to also talk to the waiter in my restaurant and ask him about cigarettes. And I'm building on what the brief says with this other piece of information, and here's a new idea. And like, yes, great. That is also applies, unless we're trying to get to quantitative data that can't be derived from a single conversation.
I think that's right. I think one of the challenges of what has happened in advertising in terms of getting to a creative strategy, which is different from the business strategy, but a creative strategy is a little bit of a clash of cultures by agencies who are either more creatively driven, which usually simply means the founders of the agency were themselves copywriters or art directors. They value the creative process more than they value anything else.
Right.
And that is their taste in great creative is their differentiator for up to about 40 years. And then after about 40 years, every creative agency is no longer seen as all that creative.
Right.
That's the longest run, right? The shortest run is like 10, maybe.
Shorter sometimes.
And sometimes shorter. And then you have more kind of like account services driven agencies. There was a hot minute in the 90s, I would say, in the early aughts, where you had a handful of independent shops that were strategy driven creative agencies, but there were so few of them. Planners didn't start agencies. Planners went to work in agencies. They might co-found an agency with a creative director, but that was a creatively driven agency. Some of that is because in a lot of agencies, strategy reports through creative.
And so, yeah.
You know, it's that they don't sit in their own. They don't have, like, a lot of agencies don't have a chief strategy officer or whatever, a head of, big agency head of strategy. That person reports to the head of creative. In some agencies, they report it through accounts, and like, in which case this is more of a client service thing that we're providing. And I also wrote a piece years ago about, like, I think I called it the siren and the muse. Like, planners and agencies have to serve these two purposes. One is siren to the clients, muse to the creative team. Like, we're supposed to make the clients feel like we're really smart, and make the creative team feel like they have everything they need in order to be inspired. And one of the things that I think has happened is you have a debate between how evidence-based and data-driven as a planner you need to be in order to be taken seriously by clients, and then how creative you need to be in order to be taken seriously by creatives, but not so creative that you have stepped on their ability to be creative.
Yeah. That's a third debate.
Yeah.
Don't put thought starters in the brief as like the famous third rail of like, but what if I want to help explain how this could be legged out?
Well, and my technique for a long time was like, here are 5 bad ideas. If I can come up with 5 bad ideas, I'm sure you, brilliant creative person that you are, can come up with at least one really good one. And that was fine. But I think, even the idea of like, can strategy come from anywhere? Sure. Yes. But it takes work. Like, and I think this is where we get to Richard Huntington's piece on the WARC website, which is fundamentally about what kind of work do you need to do to be good at strategy in 2023, 2024. And, he has a general kind of brand with the respect to the types of things that he writes. It's a little bit bullshit, as the Brits might say. And wants to sort of put a stake in the ground, wants to sort of pick a fight. And I think he's successful in some respects, and then kind of like skids to a stop right before the important part. And so I think, and the reason we wanted to talk about it is he reserves in here a whole section talking about the use of generations as lazy segmentation, essentially. And so I know that we've talked about segmentation before. You can go back and listen to the episode that we did with Paul Soldera, where we talked about how segmentations work. And you can listen to the conversation that we had with Rose Cameron about how, advertising and marketers have approached understanding generations in the past. But I think that this is something that is still present and seems to be, even based on our last conversation, with like ads that are explicitly invoking generations now, it has kind of metastasized in the advertising business and amongst marketers. And so it does have to be dealt with. But again, I feel like he kind of skids to a halt right before he tells you how to deal with it. So we can sort of talk about the piece.
Yeah. So I have a first question for you. He does want to put a stake in the ground and pick a fight. Who do you think he's picking the fight with? I've read this 20 times and I'm thinking like, okay, I see that he is sticking his chest out, but who is he thrusting it towards? The opening line is marketing is in desperate need of a reality check. Who would disagree with that?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, obviously, the marketers as a word is a very easy paper tiger, right? Like we can just sort of say marketers and that encompasses a host of sins. And because it's marketing and because we have a cultural sort of pejorative association with marketing, which is hilarious because this is America. I mean, I know he's
and also
writing in England, but
this is published in WARC, which is a journal for marketers and strategic thinkers and advertisers. So it's a little, it's not like it's in the Times taking a swipe at marketers where.
No, but it's, everybody is in the zeitgeist, right? So that I think is like, it's easy to just sort of use marketers and you know who you are is kind of the insinuation. Yeah. But to your point, it is in WARC, and WARC is for marketers and market researchers and strategists. And so this is meant to be like, hey, you, reader of this website, reader of this resource, maybe the problem's you. Like you're going to want to read this to figure out if you need a reality check or not. So some of it is just like, it's a little clickbaity, but like there is a point that he, I think, is also getting to, which is a thing that I'm mulling over quite a bit as well in our work, is I think that maybe what he's like gesturing at is that there is a difference between marketing leaders, business leaders in general, who are strategic and in touch with what's going on in their category and in their consumer marketplace and the culture, all of that. And then marketers and business leaders who are more kind of operational. And I think what I think is also happening in ad land and marketing land, as he puts it, that there's been a, 15, 20 year run of becoming more quote unquote data driven.
Yeah.
But the data is digital analytics by and large. It's how many clicks, how many views, how many shares. It's, and this is the important distinction to draw is it's not business analytics, right? Like the marketing director does not have a login to the BI system, the business intelligence system that the company is running. They don't have a login to the CRM. They don't know what the lead gen process is. They're not in the sales team.
Or at least the marketing director that is interfacing with the agency in a lot of cases is not sharing that data. What they're talking about in those meetings is top level attention metrics like clicks, upstream metrics, and not the downstream results. I think the people he's calling out are those people that are really focused on that front end of.
But I'm also just going to go ahead and say, like, I'm going to take a stand on this. Fortune 500 companies, marketing directors don't have access to that data. There's a reason they're not sharing it. They don't have it. Yeah. It exists possibly in the organization, but it does not exist in their part of the organization. And they are, for better or worse, walled off from the operational part of the business. Now, there is a trend to get rid of the CMO role and to put the head of marketing under ops. Yeah. And so maybe that will give them more access to that data. Frankly, I doubt it. But like, you're right, regardless, that kind of information is not being shared with the ad agency. And all of this is this like downstream effect of like the CEO doesn't trust the CMO to be strategic about the business. The CMO doesn't trust their agencies to be strategic about the business. Like, well, then what are you doing?
Right. Yeah, I think 3 degrees of that separation. All of a sudden it's like we have 3 interns running a campaign that's.
And we're just making kind of irrelevant stuff and hoping that it works. Or we're doing naive things. And here I will give a quick aside about Snoop Dogg and the Solo Stove, which is like, it's a stunt. And the thing about stunts is stunts create a situation in which you have to do what they call marketing the marketing. And so it's great that you've got Snoop doing this. It's funny. It's great. Drove some search results. But I didn't hear about it till after it was dead and the guy had gone and fallen on his sword about it. Like, I think one of the problems here might be no one heard about it, really. Like, okay, you saw an uptick in search results.
I think another problem with it is I don't think it's a good product. You can advertise the bejesus out of it, get it in front of me. I don't think there's a huge market need for a stove that doesn't smoke. Like, I think they misrepresent the market scale for that product. And then the CEO's in this situation where he has to quit because Snoop Dogg didn't drive sufficient sales. I think people look at it and they go like, what on earth is this?
So I know several people who have a Solo stove, and they have it for a few reasons. One is I think there's a logic that like no smoke, no sparks. And so it is a safer outdoor fire pit than a traditional one that's extremely open and just the logs are fully exposed and all that kind of thing. That's one version of it. And so the people that I know who fit that value prop are doing so because they live in brownstones in Brooklyn and have a back garden and, you know, they don't want to freak out the neighbors. So if there's no smoke, no one's calling the fire department. This used to happen to us when we would grill in our backyard in Brooklyn. People would call the fire department and we'd have to be like, come through, but all we're doing is grilling burgers. Like, would you like one? Safely outside. Would you like one, sir? But the other part of it is a design thing. Like some of the other people I know who own a Solo stove or have owned a Solo stove are frankly designers and they love the look of it. I don't know what they were trying to accomplish with Snoop and that. I don't know like exactly who the audience they were trying to garner was. But if you're just trying to get awareness, which is a perfectly reasonable objective for advertising, then the thing is you have to do it at a scale that gets awareness. This kind of idea of we'll do a stunt and people will hear about it is a time-honored nonsense idea. Like agents, again, it shows up occasionally as like little plot points in Mad Men of like, we're going to have two women get into a fight over a product and then the news will cover it. And then, you know, that's how we'll get around the fact that there's no media budget. And instead the two actors that they hire to get into a fight get arrested. Right. Whoops. You know, this is literally a plot point in Mad Men. But the thing that happened there is a thing that happens a lot with marketers, which is they also tend to be kind of term limited. Like the tenure goes up and down. The lowest it's been that I've seen is like the average tenure of a chief marketing officer is 18 months. And then the longest I've seen it is like 34 months is the average. And so like somewhere between a year and a half to 3 years to make a mark that gets you your next CMO job, because you will be fired or forced to resign. And, you know, personally, I think a lot of this is you're not connecting them to the business strategy. And so they're over there just like trying to build awareness or whatever, trying to do something cool, trying to get attention, or they are trying to maximize their ROI on the marketing budget that they have, or they're doing some mix of the two. I think a lot of brands have discovered you can't really do a mix of the two. You got to pick one, pick a lane. But if it doesn't connect to the business realities, not even the business objectives, but the business realities, then like meaning like logistics, supply chain, distribution, all of that kind of stuff, then like, it's irrelevant. But this, I think, is the CEO's fault. And I don't mean like a specific CEO. CEOs culturally their fault because they don't hire CMOs to be strategic partners in the business. They see marketing as an expense, and that's basically it. And so they're left to go run amok. And here's why I object to the idea just a little. I mean, I don't object to it. It's true. Strategy could come from anywhere. Here's why I call BS on creatives telling me that they think they can be strategic. And that's because if there's any group of people who's going to spend less time getting to know the customer, in most agencies, it's the creative team. They want to be given a brief that they feel like they can do something with, and they want to go off and we swear on this podcast, right? Have the fuck about and then come up with an idea. Like I go back to I have this book somewhere, the D&AD copybook with like Neil French's thing in there about like, I receive a brief from some junior account executive and I set it aside and I leave the agency and I go have a heavy lunch and shoot some pool and drink a bunch. And then I come back to the agency and I lay on the sofa in my office and I have a little nap. And when I wake up, whatever ideas are still in my head, I write them down. Okay. Cool story, Neil. Also a man who famously does not believe that women can be creative or funny. But like, this is the problem culturally with ad agencies, is because they have been sort of historically told, since the 80s, really, since the late 80s, let's be real, you don't know anything about our business. And we're not going to educate you about our business. We don't want to pay for you to get smart about our business.
Yes, exactly.
We just want you to make some ads and then place them. And so that is where I just kind of go, it's a nice idea. But I have worked in enough agencies and consulted to enough agencies where I've literally been told by creative directors and account directors who have worked on that piece of business for years that they do not pay attention to anything happening in the culture that would be relevant to that brand's target audience. And they're shocked when I come in going like, oh, have you seen all these stories about blah, 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 blah? And they're like, how are you finding this? And I'm like, it's just in the New York Times. I noticed it because you hired me to work on this project with you.
Which is, by the way, your hometown paper.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like, just flick through the Times and you can find an article about whatever, what new moms are freaked out about this year.
Right.
And like, use that for your diaper ads. Like, but this is just not what they do. And I think one of the problems that Richard's trying to address is, how do you start to do it?
Yeah.
Because this, like, the point that he is making is, I think, working on two sides. One is not grounded in the reality of what consumers are doing and feeling and thinking. And the other side of it is becoming extremely dependent on what I might think of as kind of tertiary data, like the clicks, the engagement, the likes, the SEO results, all of that kind of stuff, and not actually being thoughtful about all the stuff you can't measure because it's not in your CRM system or reflected in, the easy click-based social behaviors. So I don't know, 26 minutes in, is that enough preamble?
I hope. I mean, I think what his premise I don't disagree with his premise that there's this bubble and companies are stuck and marketers are stuck in this bubble. Like, okay. But to your point that you just made, like,
says
they
it's
have
a
to
land
be
of
focused.
artifice.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not just in a bubble. It is a fake bubble. It is a bubble with no connection at all to reality. Like, bubbles we talk about often are like, well, there's this one experience that is real and I'm wrapping it in a bubble.
Right.
This is like a fantasy bubble. Like, it's a bubble in which no reality transpires.
So that's where as I read and reread this, that's where I disagreed, because they are in a reality, but the reality is focused on the part they can control and understand, and that for the agency that they have to know, which is, you mentioned earlier, like understanding supply chain and understanding these parts of the business that drive results or change margin. Like, it is a weird thing for him to say, I understand, yes, we need to figure out the cultural relevancy or what's happening outside of the business to drive change in the business or the way people receive it out in the world. Yes, but he's almost arguing that the construct of the business is fake and caring about it is a waste. And, when he starts to get into solutions or the three major areas that he sees as problems, I say, well, they have to be. What else should they be focused on? They should be purely outwardly facing focused and not understanding what the business is. That doesn't make any sense.
I think so. If we kind of take his argument in parts about what marketing land is, I think the first argument he makes is a well-worn argument about ad agencies and marketing departments in general, which is the people who work in marketing, the people who work at ad agencies are urban, educated, affluent, people who care about pop culture and about high culture and local. Like, they are not normal people is always the argument, which sometimes gets articulated as they're not real people.
Right.
And it's like, no, they're real people. They're just a specific kind of person that may or may not match the target audience. And so, one of the reasons that some agencies do great work on certain brands is because the people who work at that agency are the aspirational target for that brand. And they love it. They love people who work on Nike love Nike. They are outdoorsy and athletic, and they care about sport and all of that stuff. And they care about fashion, and they care about culture. Like, they are the audience for Nike. And, one of the things that I laugh about is when I was like interning creative assistant at Wieden & Kennedy, they had the Microsoft business, and there were a bunch of people that they had hired from BBDO West who had been working on Apple until Apple went back to Chiat Day. And they hired them and moved them up to Portland to work on Microsoft. And there was no more demoralizing account move that I could imagine for creative directors than to go from working on Apple to start working on Microsoft.
Yeah, it's actually mean.
Yes.
It's mean to the client. Like, I mean, it is mean to the Microsoft
to
client.
Everybody.
Yeah.
It's mean to everybody. It was demoralizing for the creative directors. It was probably not great for I don't know. I think the Microsoft folks thought, we're going to get some of that creative juice. And it was like, no, they don't actually want to give it to you.
They have hate you. Yeah.
Yeah. They don't like your product.
Yeah.
And so, he makes a heck of a statement, which is marketing folk don't look, think, love, or live like ordinary people. And I'm like, wow, if they don't look, think, love, or live like ordinary people, then what are they? They must not be actual humans. Like, this is a bold statement to make. And I think then he kind of softens it slightly and says, well, maybe it's not just the bubble you live in, that you live in, whatever you live in, you live in Islington in London, or you live in the Lower East Side in New York City or something, or Brooklyn Heights. It's that you work in a bubble. You work with all these other people who also are not like real people. But the other thing he says, and I actually think there's some truth in this, is that it's not just aspirational in the sense of like, I don't know, these are some sort of elevated humans of some kind, but they are also aspirational for the organizations that hire them. That he describes it as a fake world conjured into existence by marketers' distaste for the real one. And like, this does make me think about the problem of ad agencies' high overhead. And like, it's expensive to operate an ad agency for a variety of reasons, but one of them is you need a cool office with cool furniture and a cool conference room and tech and a keg and whatever, in order to make the client who would rather come visit you than have you come visit them in their cubicle farm. They want to come hang out in a cool creative place. You're the cool creatives, right? Let's be cool and creative together in a cool creative place. And so I think there is some truth about like creating this artifice that is actually unnecessary to the project of creating good advertising or good marketing. I mean, it's nice to have, but you don't need it.
Right.
And then he takes it one more step and basically says that research is culpable in all of this because we enable the artifice. And he says that research does this by, quote, serving up just enough reality to make aspirational marketing seem connected to something true and present, but not enough to let reality penetrate too far into the machinations of the marketer. And also, like, I mean, yes, sometimes true. Sometimes true. I mean, I have personally worked on research projects in the last year where I gave them some real hard reality, and they were actually actively angry at me. And the they here is an agency. They were actively angry at me for being so clear about the reality for the people they wanted to address. And because it wasn't a pretty reality, it was actually really scary.
Yeah.
And they were really pissed off at me about that. They were trying to find the silver lining, right? And it's like, well, the silver lining is over here. You want to go this way, but that's not the way of the silver lining. The silver lining's over this way. You're asking these people who are in danger to help other people who are in danger. And I thought we were living in the culture that says, put on your own oxygen mask before helping others. Like, you need to help these people first before they can help the people you want them to help. And also, what a convoluted strategy. But setting that aside, and I've burned that bridge now officially, but like that does happen. It does happen where, I've also had brands who, when we were doing ethnographic research, decided they didn't like the look of a particular woman that we were interviewing. This was for a project about a consumer packaged good. And we had to recast the interview so that the client felt like it looked like what they were hoping for. So the real audience is a 35 to 45-year-old woman running a household. But what they wanted, with enough money to afford to buy this thing off the shelf instead of making it at home. And what they wanted was the 25-year-old girl living in sectioned housing. Effectively, because she was pretty and young and she was still using her money to go buy this thing. And it's like, oh, okay, you didn't like the woman who was a little overweight. You do like the 25-year-old. So that's who we're going to do the ethnography with, because I just want to get this over with.
Right.
And that happens in research a lot. But I would just say, I don't meet a lot of researchers who are like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to serve you some chewed up baby food for you to digest because that's what you want. Most of them want to tell you the truth. And they would like to tell you a hard truth because inside of a hard truth is a really exciting opportunity. But ad agencies don't like hard truths most of the time. And marketers, frankly, like them even less. Mm-hmm. Because hard truths require them to do something they don't usually do. And what they want to do is what they usually do.
Yeah. They have a playbook and they want the playbook to be validated. They don't want to have to rewrite it. They don't want to have to pay somebody to rewrite it. They don't want to be surprised and change plans and go into their boss's office and say, okay, I know for the first year I was pitching this thing, but now we're gonna go this other way because I have this research.
Yes. But I think you were starting to get to one of the things, though, where this argument starts to kind of fall apart a little bit. And he's coming in hot, like it's a take, we can quibble about parts of the take and who's really responsible. But then he tries to say the reason, I guess, the causal chain here is researchers enable this magical thinking and they do it by not getting in person with real folks. And then he shows a chart.
Yeah, so he makes a claim and then he goes on in his three ways argument that says that that strategists are removed from culture, removed from people, removed from the constituencies, the audiences, all that stuff. So they put this chart in from the Future of Strategy survey that WARC conducts annually. And what I was laughing about is if you just look at the chart without reading it, which is how charts are designed, the chart at the top that says the research that is conducted the least by respondents is in-person qualitative research, ethnography, focus groups, and interviews. Oh, okay, that's compelling. That supports his case. When you look at the numbers to the right of each bar, it's 21% don't conduct that research, which means 79% of respondents do conduct that research, which if in any survey, if you got 79%, that is like off the charts home run. Yay.
Mm-hmm. I'm shocked it's that much. As a researcher, I'm shocked it's nearly 80% who do in-person qualitative research in 2023.
Yeah, it almost doesn't feel like it can't be that much, but that's the report they're reporting, and it goes exactly counter to how could just maybe the WARC people are going to be mad at us, but how could social listening and reading magazines be lower?
Well, but it's not lower. It's higher, right? What social listening is saying is that it's 87%.
Oh yeah, you're correct. Even I'm turned around on the presentation of the bar chart.
Let's just pause here for a moment and just say, friends who may be watching the YouTube version of this, we've put the chart up here. It is showing you a bar chart that reflects the answer. We don't conduct this type of research, and the proportion, so it's ranked in the percentage of people who most don't do a thing. Which is already specious and super, I am shocked that WARC decided to go with this version of a chart. I think if Richard wants to make the case that researchers are presenting altered visions of reality to people, this is a pretty good case study in showing an altered vision of reality.
I think this is the example of all of our charts will be presented as double negatives. I think it's pretty okay, Richard, you're onto something. I agree with you.
But what it's really saying is a minimum of 80% of marketers are doing some kind of research into their audience.
Yeah.
The thing they're doing the least is, frankly, the most time consuming and the most expensive, which is in-person qualitative research. But I think it's this. I don't think it's unreasonable to think that 80% have done some of this in the last year. I believe that they've done some interviews. I believe that they've done some focus groups in ethnography. Now, I'm going to be a researcher for a minute here and say, well, there's in-person and then there's in-person, right? There's the in-person that we send a research company out to go do. And then there's the in-person that we either attended in person or went and did ourselves. And very few organizations are set up to do their own research. They have insights teams that hire research firms. And so, so I'll quibble slightly about that. But I would bet that most brands have done something in person in the last year. But again, it's the more expensive, more time consuming, harder to execute thing. And so it does not surprise me that it's the one where 1 in 5 are saying they don't do it. But 4 out of 5 are saying that they do.
Right. And that is a number that has been working for Trident for 40 years. Like that. 4 out of 5 dentists is really popular.
Yes. But I think the other thing is there is another part of this, which is online qualitative research in parens, virtual ethnography, focus groups, interviews. Now, virtual is a loaded word. Virtual just means asynchronous and conducted online. It means done and or done online. So long before the pandemic, most of our work had shifted to that because it solved 2 of the problems of in-person qualitative research, which is travel, time, and expense. And so we could get into field faster because we didn't have to physically get there. And we could also schedule things more lightly. We didn't have to when you set up a qualitative research project for in-person research, you have to set up literal hours within which you are going to conduct this research. Right. You have to schedule it ahead of time. You can't be flexible about when interviews are going to take place because you only have the room at the focus group facility for so long, or you can only get so many hours of people's time at their home or their place of business. If I do a digital diary and a follow-up interview, then they can do it from wherever, whenever, over the course of several days, and then we can have a conversation when it's convenient for them. So I think that number is actually an extremely encouraging one, not just for my business, but for the problem he's trying to solve, which is actually getting engaged in reality. I know that there is this belief that it is better to go be in person, and I do share it. I really do. But I think there is also something that happens when I'm not walking into someone's home that actually opens up the aperture a little bit.
Yeah.
If I'm not coming to visit them, they don't clean their house. They don't do their hair. They don't put on makeup. They just show me what's in their house. Like, show me what's in your bathroom. Show me what's in your pantry. They'll just take a picture of it, right? And it's a mess. And the kids are running around screaming. And all of that is happening because I'm not there. And they don't have to control their environment for a guest. So there are trade-offs either way.
Yeah.
But this chart is a hell of a thing. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
And even for that online, the virtual ethnography focus groups interviews that you point out, that number is close to 90.
Yeah.
So if I take the combination of those 2 things, it's like we're doing a hell of a lot of qual.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we can debate the merits of like true iHuts or like visits and those things. And I agree, they're valuable. There's more context clues you get, but there are positive things you can get from some of those virtual pieces, which some of the benefits of the virtual pieces, like using diaries and things, people don't have to have the answers right then in real time. They can think about a prompt and come back to it. If you're doing like online communities, they can come back and answer later versus like while you're there, putting them on the spot, or in a focus group where they're afraid to say something because the alpha person is like dominating the conversation at times. I mean, we don't even have to, that's a whole other episode probably, but
yeah. Don't get me started on how that's also kind of a thing that doesn't really happen if it's a good moderator. But anyway, but there is a lot of research happening here. My only question is, as always, when I see a chart that's based on a survey, my move is to say I have follow-up questions.
Right.
So you're reading print magazines and newspapers. What would that be? Like 84%, 87% are engaged in social listening. 96% are looking at trend data and transaction data. 98% are doing competitor analysis. 99% are reading online sources, news and information sites, blogs, listening to podcasts.
Googling.
My question is, about what? Are you just doing that in general? You're keeping up on the trends, or are you reading specifically about your industry? Are you actively trying to, like a thing that, that I do when we work on a project is I go find like the Reddit community
Right.
for that audience. And I, follow that thread and look at the kinds of things that people are talking about there. I find a book about the history of that thing, the kind of cultural history of that thing. I read the news about it. But it's specifically about that thing. Years ago, I worked on NASCAR. I'm not a NASCAR fan. I mean, I now appreciate it because I've worked on it and had to spend time with people who were. But like the way that I did that was by, yes, absolutely, going to NASCAR races and hanging out with NASCAR fans. But it was also setting up a Google alert for everything related to NASCAR, interviewing, people from the teams and the tracks, joining some Facebook groups of NASCAR fans, talking to people I knew who were into NASCAR. All of those things were very focused on NASCAR. And so, but I know, having walked around agencies, that sometimes what they're doing is they're just like scrolling through, cool portfolio sites and looking at the latest cool stuff on whatever cool stuff blog there is these days.
Or
and
looking at award show books to try to see what kind of ideas jump off the page. Yeah,
exactly. Listening to marketing podcasts, not podcasts about NASCAR, right? And so I do have a question about that. But even if that's in the mix, but they're doing the other stuff too, like that's great. Like, this is telling me that actually there's a real effort being made. Now, what's the volume? How much are they spending against it? How many hours are they putting against it? I don't know. I can't tell any of that from this data. It's like if the answer is chart, I did it at least once this year, then
so great. The chart is a sub-result of the question, how often do you engage in the following research practices? And this is the do not conduct this type of research part of that. So it's bottom box.
It's bottom box. Yeah. That is a really good point, Adam. That is a really good point.
So I would love to see bottom two. No, I'm just kidding.
What I'd love to see is what's in the top box. Yeah. Like, we do this all the time. Like, assuming that this was a Likert scale question. I don't know. Maybe it was a binary question of we do it, we don't do it. I doubt it. But let's pretend.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this suggests that taken together, everybody is doing some amount of, at the very least, competitive analysis. At the very least, they're looking at the competitive set and getting a map of the category.
And your point is good. Just because they're doing this research at times doesn't mean it's relevant or high quality. And I think that's what Huntington is saying as well. Like, when you get into his 3 tools, which we should jump into now, especially when it gets to narcissism, which is his first tool that he has most tolerated, it's like, okay, so what he says is, the first misplaced tool that marketers use that are keeping the bubble and the artifice in place is narcissism. That it protects marketers from hearing or seeing what's going on in people's lives. It keeps the focus on their own business. So what he's saying directly above this is there's not enough quality research going on. And then here he's saying, no, we're too focused on the business and not enough focus on what's happening outside. And I'm not sure you can make that case.
I mean, I'll say as a researcher, we get a lot of feedback from clients about discussion guides and questionnaires. And the stuff they are often most interested in is, how do we stack up against our competitors? And they have a predetermined idea about who their competitors are. And one of my clients, who I adore, is always the reality check on that, where he's like, the biggest competitor is doing nothing.
Right.
But and frequently, like, okay, there's your competitor set, and then there's like the choice menu that your customers actually have before them. And so one of the options is do nothing. One of the options is choose you. One of the options is choose something else that's not strictly speaking in your category. Or choose a competitor that you think you're not competing against because they're a much higher or lower price point, or they have a greater or more limited array of products, or, you know, they distribute online versus in store, or, you know, whatever it is. And so I do think there's a certain amount of tail wagging the dog of like, they're imagining the chart they want to show to the business team later on, which is like how we stack up against our competitors. And so they focus a lot on those types of questions. That does happen.
Yeah.
Good researchers will say, okay, but we need the context for why they're making those selections. So what else is going on?
Qual or quant, it's not a 3-question survey. That's just which of our competitors, how do you like us compared to our competitors? Thank you. Like, oh my God. There's room for both. There's room for nuance, and tucking those questions in about the known competitors, and trying to find those not known competitors or alternate solutions, the comparables. It's like,
the note I made on that part of the piece where he said, regardless of the method, we spend all our time and effort asking people about our brand and competition. So there's no opportunity for people to talk about themselves. My note on that was, this is called doing it wrong.
Right.
If that is what's happening in the research you receive, Richard, then you need to hire a new research partner because they're doing it wrong.
In fact, we're available, Richard.
We can help.
I would love
this
to work
is not
with
how we
Sachi.
do it.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you're not getting any of that connection, what this might be an indictment of is Sachi more than
here's maybe I think the other thing, just, you know, thinking about my time at Digitas, is like, we did not have research budgets to go do our own research. I mean, we did guerrilla stuff all the time. Little shout out to Enrico Gotti, who is always willing to go do a man on the street interview. Thank you for doing that. But like, we frequently received research, right? That the client had commissioned from someplace else. And a lot of times, because I had been, you know, at Holland Partners for 4 years prior to that, and then OTX before it got bought by Ipsos for about 1.5 years prior to that, like, I would get these decks and go, really? This is what you're giving me to work with? Like, the numbers don't add up to 100, kind of a problem on these decks. So I can imagine that what he's receiving from the marketing team is unimpressive to him. From the client's marketing team. But I will also tell you, as a researcher who works directly for marketing teams edit down our decks to the stuff they think is the most important or tells the story they want to tell.
Right.
And so I have no idea what the actual research company fully did unless I get a deck that's on their template. If I get the 100-page deck on their template, I got their research.
Right.
If I got the 15-page deck,
I look for the word summary, and if that's on the cover, it's like, no, give me the other one.
Yes, exactly.
If it's a summary for directors or executives or managers, like, nope, give me the raw stuff.
And I would also just say, if you're getting that kind of data, my guess is mostly what you are receiving is survey data. And you are receiving probably brand trackers. And because those kinds of things of like, how are we stacking up against the competitors? What are the brand attributes most associated with us? You know, how my propensity to buy, my enthusiasm about the brand, whatever, all of those things would be in a brand tracker. Those tend to be quite focused on how are we doing, and not as much on customer context. Again, results may vary depending on which research company you engage to do your brand trackers and how you design them. But that's what he's calling narcissism. I would just call garbage in, garbage out. Like, someone designed a bad study. And if that was commissioned by the agency, then that's the agency's fault. If it was commissioned by the marketer, that's the marketer's fault. If it's just a bad research company, you know, get a better one. There are lots of great researchers out there. So, and you know, here's 2 of them right here. But there's plenty of great talented researchers. So I kind of look at that and go, all right, whatever, you're just doing it wrong. So let's move on to tool number 2, which is what he talks about with segmentation.
So I guess this goes into, we talked about this in our last conversation, I think, about, you know, people hate personas because personas I call them avatars, what he's talking about, where they get the alliterative title that's like Bonnie the bargain hunter, and we diminish them. He says acronym, but I think what he means is the alliterative title, which I agree. Those are terrible. Those are not helpful. But I don't think creating segments of your audience, of your current customers, of the market in general is overall bad. I think, again, he makes some assertions that I know you have a particular bone with one of them, but I'm not sure I think it's true. It's not true.
I mean, he starts off talking about how agencies just sit around twiddling their thumbs waiting for the most recent segmentation, which is hilarious to me because that means you're sitting around for like 2 years because brands don't refresh their segmentations that often. There are 2 reasons to refresh your segmentation. One is something about the culture or the category has changed significantly enough that it's worth it to go find out what's different. The other is you got a new CMO and they don't like the old one. But that's why it's about every 2 years. So, but
yeah, it kind of roughly lines up with that duration, that tenure. Yeah,
exactly. But even if it's not that, like, things do change. New entrants come into the category. Something about, I mean, I like an example would be, coming up on like 20 years ago, I did some work for Sci-Fi Channel and we asked people if they considered themselves to be sci-fi fans. And everyone would say no. And then we would ask them, what are your favorite movies and TV shows? And they would list Star Wars and Terminator and Harry Potter and X-Files and whatever, right? Star Trek. And so, yeah, you're sci-fi fans, but what you think a sci-fi fan is not how you see yourself.
Right.
Now, if you were to ask people, do you consider yourself to be a sci-fi fan? Plenty of people would say yes. Because it's no longer the guy covered in crumbs in his mom's attic playing video games and watching horror movies. Like, that's not the sci-fi fan anymore.
Oh, I feel seen. Except for my mom's attic. But the crumbs, accurate. Horror movies, definitely accurate. Hurtful.
That's me on a sick day.
Yeah.
Crumbs and horror movies. But like so first of all, let's not be histrionic about how we're constantly waiting around for the latest segmentation. You are not.
No.
You're lucky if the client has a segmentation, to be honest with you. And here's why. Segmentation studies are expensive. They are a 6-figure project.
And time consuming. And resource intensive.
Yes. So they are not something clients are doing constantly. And also, people actually don't change that frequently. They do change. Culture changes, categories shift, people's behavior evolves, but that doesn't happen all the time. It happens slowly at first and then kind of all at once, and you need to catch it when it has fully changed.
But also, Farrah, what he's saying is that before he gets to here, he's saying agencies don't do enough research to understand the customers outside of the business. And then in this part, he's saying...
but then they do too much segmentation studies.
Agencies are guilty of waiting around for new information about the customers. And it's like, wait, which is it? Neither of those are true, by the way, because the chart disproves the first part and reality disproves the second part. They both can't be true and they both can't be bad. And yeah, there are bad segmentations. There are bad personas. There are bad avatars. There are bad marketers. There are marketers that are too focused on the business and not enough on culture or cultural connections or insights related to that. But geez, like, I don't think that means that everybody is hiding with their head in the sand.
Yes. I think the other thing about this is what he seems to think that segmentations do or do now. I'm not sure if he thinks that they used to be better, but he says something that is quite simply untrue about segmentations. And again, because it would be resource intensive and cost prohibitive for it to be true. He says segmentations, he says segmentations are not universal, but category specific, as if someone changes identity when they stop thinking about broadband and start shopping for food. And I'm like,
you totally do.
You absolutely do change your identity.
Those things the same way.
When I shop for food, hopefully I have choices. Now, if I live in a food desert, I have very few choices. If I live in a food oasis, I have lots and lots of choices.
Yeah.
But when I have a broadband decision to make, I have one choice. One. It's not a choice. I just have to sign up with Optimum or Comcast or whatever, unless I want to pay to get fiber brought into my home.
Yeah, sometimes you might be lucky and have a second choice, like Quest or whatever they're called, might be in your market trying to break in and offering some deal that's too good to be true. Yeah. So he's right technically because he says they don't change identity. But I do think they change role. They change the way they process information, the consideration, how many choices they even want varies. Like, I don't want 5 choices of broadband provider, man. 2 is great. But food, if we're talking about a grocery shelf, like, okay, I need fewer jelly options. I don't need 19, I need 3.
Yes. So I don't know if he's trying to argue that they should be universal, that we should be looking for like constants in people's identities, but that would be impossible for a variety of reasons. First of all, that's just not how people are. There are some things that I'm incredibly cheap about. And then there are some things that it's like, I don't care. It's $500. Here's my money. Like, you know, and
the things that you are like that with are different than the things that I am like that with.
Yes.
And it is because we're both individual, beautiful snowflakes that have our own history and legacy and what we value as far as time, maybe, of doing extra research or interviewing a provider or making those phone calls or looking at those websites.
Yes. As we discussed, I really like gear.
I know.
Like if I can buy
a new microphone every episode.
A new microphone or a preamp or a cable or a light or some, you know, any kind of a saw. I have so many saws. I've got a miter saw. I got a table saw. I got a jigsaw. I
have exactly one saw.
I got a really nice Japanese handsaw. Very good stuff. But like, I like hobbies because I can buy tools. Then there's other stuff where I'm like, I refuse to pay that. Like, I will not pay $7 for that thing. It is worth no more than $5 to me. Like, so anyway, segmentations are not actually supposed to be about people's quote unquote identities. They are supposed to be about the kind of confluence of their attitudes and beliefs and their behavior in the category.
And
if I'm Nike, I'm not responsible for your computer purchasing behavior. I'm responsible for your apparel and sports related behavior.
Yeah. And there are companies, there are ad agencies and research groups like Nonfiction, who I know I think I like their work a little more than you do, that specialize.
I just don't understand how they make money, but that's a different story.
Yeah.
I think I do, but they don't seem to want to say it.
They specialize in these broader ethnographies of subcultures and or category, interest. And those are really interesting. And if Wieden & Kennedy produces one on like streetwear, I'm going to subscribe and buy it and download and listen to the TED Talk. Like, yeah, but that's not really practical if you're selling cookies all the time. Like every piece of research does not have to be presented as a microsite that has a video by an Academy Award winner.
No.
Like it can just be a PowerPoint deck that says, hey, when they're in, this is roughly who the person is that buys these cookies. And we can tell that because these are the types of grocery stores and these are the neighborhoods, these are the zip codes they're in. And when they're at the shelf, these are the 3 questions they ask about cookies.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is, and the other thing is like, he's decided to pick a bone with segmentation specifically. But there's a lot of different kinds of research. As I mentioned already, there are brand tracking studies. There are concept tests. There are pricing studies. There are shopper marketing projects. Like there's so many different types of research for different types of questions. And so, segmentations may not be the answer to the questions he's trying to get answers to. But the other thing about it is there are segmentations that are meant for product development, and there are segmentation studies that are meant for media buying, frankly. And they are often not the same. Like the segments you define for building products are not the same segments you would define for buying media, because it's not how you buy media.
Right.
Like how I think about designing a product is about people's needs, met and unmet, and their current behaviors and all of that stuff as owners of the product and users of the product. But then I want to take that group of people and segment them again based on what kind of media they consume so that I can advertise to them in the places that they are most likely to see the advertising.
Yeah. 2
different purposes and frankly 2 different methodologies. And you could try to jam them together, but it's uncomfortable for everybody. The other thing he talks about, so there's so many ways of engaging with people, and the types of stuff that nonfiction does, I also think it's great. I would love to be able to do more of those types of projects. I would love to figure out how to sustain myself on only those projects. But the real interesting thing to me about those types of projects, because we do them also, is like they tend to be commissioned as, frankly, show ponies. They are there, they exist, they are commissioned in large part to make the new CMO look great.
Yeah.
They are often commissioned so that you can have something PRable. You can invest in this research and then use it as PR because you produce this cool piece of content.
That's right.
Or you can roadshow it in your sales calls to your retail partners or whatever. And so we have done things like this in the past. And they have a place. But like, that's not the only reason to do segmentation. It's not the only reason to do any of the other types of studies that you might do. The other thing, though, that he talks about is the idea that like they insist the population with all its diversity and complexity can be divided into 7 groups of people, maybe fewer, rarely more. And look, no quantitative researcher worth their salt believes that actually all people can be divided roughly into 7 groups. What we do is try to prioritize for you. The other thing is, like, once you get out past 6, 7, maybe 8 groups, it starts to become so granular that it's hard to say statistically that those are groups.
Or even more importantly, for most brands, that you could even buy against them or reach them.
Right.
Or that you would.
Yes. And so we might show you in a cluster chart, here are 6 clusters, and then we're going to map those against like share of wallet or share of voice or share of whatever, and like tell you these are the 3 that we think you ought to prioritize because they're the easiest to buy media against, or they're the ones with the greatest propensity to buy, or whatever. And look, the segmentation study does not exist solely to like clarify the whole universe of human experience within your category.
Yeah.
It is there to help you prioritize your marketing spend.
And it's also
that's why they exist.
I think his assertion is kind of like, oh, they take the 330 million Americans and they boil them into 6 persona types or segments. No. We're talking, this is about 500,000 people that we've carved up that are your primary target. Mm-hmm. And we're cutting them up into 3 groups. Yeah. That it's like, here's what these people want. Here's what people that seem like these people want. And I don't think it's like,
well, there's only so many motivations for buying a thing.
Yeah. But I mean, that brings us to generational marketing because yes. I agree with him that generation, I think, as we've been talking about for over mm-hmm. a year, it's stupid.
I think that is what we've been talking about. Yes. And yes, I think where he kind of winds up is saying generational marketing is, what does he call it? The end of level boss.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay.
He's not wrong about that,
bro.
Yeah.
But anyway, like final boss is actually what we call these things, typically. Yeah. But in any event,
I thought it might be like a UK-US translation.
Maybe it is. But like he calls this the stinking edifice of generational marketing, and oh man, hard agree.
Yeah,
like the whole point of this show, right, is that it's the worst of all things. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say that I feel like he must be a listener of this show. This piece came out last fall. We had been at this for quite some time. I had already been on the record saying that this is basically astrology for marketers. He says it should be given as much credence in sensible organizations as astrology.
Yeah.
So shout out to you, Richard, for listening to the show. Thank you.
In fact, Richard, if you would like to join as a guest, we would love to have you.
We would love to have you, yes.
To dive deeper into this debate.
We can argue about this some more.
Yeah.
Yes. But I think there is something interesting about, because I feel like we've now had some conversations where like Pew Research has basically said we're gonna like step away from generations as a way of thinking about groups of people in general.
Everything.
Yes, and like clearly we've been sort of charting the progress of like, okay, so millennials were young. They were in their 20s for a really long time. They were in their 20s well into their 30s. And now that they're hitting 40, they're just turning 30. Right. And so like there's kind of a loosey-goosiness and also we've changed the parameters of what their birth years were. Originally it was like 80 to 2002 or something. And now it's
pay any attention to that.
82 to 96 or whatever. All these people born in 1980 who were convinced that they were millennials. Now no longer millennials.
Sorry, you're going to be ignored like the rest of us.
Too bad.
Yeah.
But that feels like a thing that is like waning in its cultural relevance. And yet, what he says in the final sentence of that paragraph is, and yet we continue to indulge generational marketers and the research companies and consultancies that prop them up. And I know it's true because in our last episode, we looked at ads that literally put generations in the creative.
Yeah.
Meet the Jennifers, Gen X, Gen Y, and Gen Z. And like, so I agree with him that this is a problem. It is the laziest form of segmentation.
I wish
it's not
his
even
whole
true
piece
segmentation.
was about this.
Yes.
Because I think this makes the case much more strongly and in a more compelling way than the 2 points he makes above it. Like, I don't know. Marketers should be focused on their business. And
yes,
I don't think segmentation is the enemy. Bad segmentation is the enemy.
Yes. But this is even where I would kind of say, I don't really think that slicing your survey responses by age brackets is actually a segmentation. And anybody who actually conducts segmentation studies, I think, would also bristle at the idea that just doing cuts by age is a segment. That's not how segmentations are done. It's a more complicated form of statistical analysis. Regression analysis gets used. I don't know what any of these things mean, but I'm told.
I would argue it takes at least 2 factors to create a segment.
Yes, it takes at least 2 factors. Yes.
Maybe 3. I don't know.
Ideally, you would have at least 3 data points. One would be demographic, and probably several would be demographic. But like, let's take it as one might be demographic. One will be behavioral, and another will be attitudinal. And like, then we'll sort of triangulate and look at those things. But a lot of what they do when they get the survey responses back is just look for correlations. Like, if we look at it this way against this question, what happens? If we look at it this way against this question, what happens? What he's describing is not a segmentation. It's a crosstab. Like, it's just a cut by age. That is my specialty. If you listen to my new show, Crosstabs, you'll hear all about it in the context of politics. There's my plug.
I set you up.
Thank you very much. But yeah, like, it's just a crosstab. It would be the same thing as like our segmentation is men versus women. That's not a segment either. Like, it's just,
there should be a point in his article that's like gender-based segments. They're the worst.
They're the worst. Yeah, absolutely.
Also agree.
So, I agree with him that doing that is what I would just sort of call like lazy segmentation. He says that this was always a charlatan's business, and I couldn't agree more.
But at the same, yeah, I agree. And it's like, I think what he's arguing for is the same thing we would, which is like, we want good research. We want to derive and develop good insights that are strong. We want to have the time and space to ask these hard questions and do the analysis to get to real answers. I don't think that creates. His argument comes off as if he's saying researchers are putting in the effort to uphold a fiction. And I don't think that's what's happening. I think more and more as I work with agencies, it's more like, we don't have the budget, we don't have the time, the client's not going to pay us to do it, they're not going to let us ask the questions, they don't have time, it's a rush, the CMO just got hired, so they have to do something right away, the CMO thinks he's going to get fired, so we have to do something right away.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I have worked in agencies where we had no research resources and none provided to us by the client. And so we created our own personas to have something to work against. Yeah. And we created them out of desk research, publicly available data, the Pew Research website. We created them out of talking to people on the street. We created them out of even looking at what the other advertisers in the category were doing and trying to deconstruct them. Like, who do they think they're talking to? What is the use case they're imagining? And just to have something to write to, something to design for. And, the thing about creating advertising is it's not really for the marketer. It's for the target audience. Oh. We're trying to create something for them to feel some connection to what the marketer is trying to sell.
Yeah. So we absolutely have to understand them. And the context.
Yes, we have to understand them somehow. And if that means sometimes we're making up pretty stories because we have no resources to do anything else, then, well, that's the best we got. Right. And so I don't actually even necessarily fault ad agencies for this. Over the years, they have been squeezed out of the research process and squeezed of any excess budgets that they might be able to use for research. And they're not trusted to do research because clients believe that they'll game the research to get the result that they want. And all they really want is to win a lion at Cannes. which is like the dumbest, laziest story ever about ad agencies, even though sometimes it's true. But like, you know, I think that the thing about what he's also getting to is like the generational marketing thing props up other advertising tropes, particularly about young consumers, that have existed for a really long time. That young people are inherently optimistic, that young people love change, that young people want change, that young people care about the world around them, and they're global and they're digital and they're optimistic and they're, you know, into sustainability and into human rights and into all these things.
And digital natives.
Digital natives may or may not be any of those things once you actually start getting into segmentation studies, but like true ones. And so I agree with him that I think these are lazy con jobs that prop up stories that people want to believe because, like Rose talked about, they want to believe good things about their own children.
Yeah.
People in midlife want to believe there is a future beyond themselves.
Yeah.
And so we're hopeful that you're hopeful because we're not.
Right. Or we know the truth about this product or category, and we need to know that somebody else sees it differently or has hope for it.
But I also think like he's overstating the case about the importance of generational marketing in marketing. Like it has been a while since I have seen a marketing deck that actually tries to break the internal marketing deck. Let's put it that way, that tries to break things down by generations. Yeah. So I think once again, we're back to the problem of resources, which is if he feels like ad agencies are overly reliant on generational marketing, those are agencies that are not doing any primary research or benefiting from any primary research. They're reading the Intuit, you know, trend report about how Gen Z feels about finance.
Correct. It might be his agency, what they're sharing with him.
Yeah. But I do want to acknowledge that like ad agencies are squeezed out of this. They are not active participants in research a lot of the time, and they don't get to conduct it on their own. And I think they've, generally speaking, lost muscle memory for how to do it well. And they are dependent on public sources. And public sources like using this because there's nothing proprietary about a generational cut of the data.
It's an easy thing for them to release without sharing any inside data.
Yeah.
So in earnings calls, it's an easy thing to cite.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. So he has some interesting prescriptions. I'm not sure that I think that they're totally actionable or go far enough. I guess actually my problem with it is I'm not sure that they go far enough. Like he's trying to get people out of the building into actual interaction with the actual audience. He's trying to get,
and that's something you and I talked about on my other show with you as a guest, talking about going on walkabouts and
yes,
deep diving. Like we have to do that. So.
Yeah. And I think like, you know, he tries to split the difference a little bit. Let's go broad or go deep, but not mess about in the middle. And I think, no, go deep. Like, honest to God, just the deeper you understand
like
something,
wants to do,
the more insightful you'll be. And I do think that talking about real people and their stories is the thing that if you want to be a smart strategist in marketing and branding, or a smart strategist anywhere on the business side, in politics, wherever, you have to get into contact with real people and their lived experiences, as much as that phrase is overused. The fictional persona drives me nuts, and it does not get us anywhere we actually want to go. It's fine if it's all we can do, but we should be trying to do better.
I think we should debate that on another episode, because I use that and I think it's valuable.
The made up personas?
Well, not made up. I mean, they're based in data, but.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. Like, I think there are a lot of agencies that kind of like read a couple Google pieces and a trend report from, you know, Mr. Y or whatever, and that's close enough. And so then they're done. No. Yeah. But I think, you know, the real thing is, Richard, come on, let's talk about this a little bit more. Let's get into like, why'd you write this? Did you get a bad report?
That's exactly how it reads. He was like making notes during a terrible presentation. And he's like, I'm going to write the WARC.
Exactly. Well, he's a regular contributor to WARC, and his pieces are generally interesting and good. I think like the interesting thing to me is that if people in marketing are regarding generations as any kind of segmentation, I don't know what we're doing. All right. I think we've beaten this horse
to death
into the ground. Next time we'll talk about something else.
All right. Well, I think we nailed it.
Yep. Nothing more to say about that. We will obviously include the article link in the show notes. Perfect. And thank you all for listening to us rant.
In the Demo is written and hosted by Farrah Bostic and Adam Pierno, with support from the Difference Engine. Edited by Allison Preisinger and Amp Studio, with production support from Ashley Darrington. Music used with permission by Omega Man under the Creative Commons license. Go to inthedemopodcast.com for behind-the-scenes research, supporting information, and transcripts. If you'd like to support the show, please rate, review, and share the show with people you think will appreciate it. Thanks for listening.